Welcome to the 406th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. One more time, I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete. Thanks for listening. Well, I'm a plant-based cardiologist for the third time who survived Ian. We've got the yard cleaned up, patched up some mango trees. Some are gone. Some of our most beautiful ones are gone. Little papaya leaves are starting to come back. Some trees or leaves on certain trees that are standing are getting new leaves. So everything in Florida is resilient. I think that's a great sign. We're all resilient here in Florida and a lot of different places in the world. We all are exposed to the harshness of nature now and then. We're doing cleanup. What amazes me is, again, the bananas are springing up out of what was just a stalk. Leaves, again, starting to come back. Little seedlings growing. Tower Garden has been replanting. So nature has a way of, rebounding. And it's a good lesson for all of us to learn. We have to sometimes get knocked down, maybe, ruminate a little bit in the dirt, but eventually we have to pick ourselves up and go on. So I'm happy to say that we're in the cleanup phase. There's a lot of destruction down here, a lot of huge trees, a lot of homes and people that really lost a lot. We are very fortunate. My heart goes out to a lot of the people that lost complete roofs, flooding. One of our hospitals is pretty much shut down except for an emergency room because of flooding. So it was a bit of a disaster down here, but again, we'll be back, as our friend would say. It's a little bit ironic. Before the hurricane, I started reading a book called Deep Survival, Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why by Lawrence Gonzalez. It's a great read. I'm not finished with it completely. I didn't read any during the hurricane while we sat in the laundry room. It's a little too dark, and I was afraid how it might turn out. But, one of the things that he talks about, people that are in disasters, it's the harshness of nature that we forget about. Some of my friends asked me, would I come to where they were or get out of town? And I really did believe I assessed the situation as far as flooding in my particular area. It's not always accurate to people that were flooded in my area within a, say, 15-mile radius. There was a dam that broke that I didn't know existed. So obviously that's something that I couldn't account for. But people about 6 miles away that were the highest elevation got some flooding. But I made a decision the best of my abilities and, had a plan for how I was going to ride it out. But this book talks again about, whether it's tornadoes, hurricanes, snowstorms, weather turning bad on top of a Colorado mountain at 3:00 and starting to lightning, people getting struck. And we spend so much time in a controlled environment that we forget what nature is really like in a lot of instances, and perhaps take it for granted of what nature can do. And, I also think we forget what human resilience can do if put to the test. So, again, I'm happy to report everything is working out. Maybe I'll talk about the book a little bit in episodes down the road. I got a question about my pull-up challenge. I was in the middle of the pull-up challenge when the hurricane kind of hit. And obviously my workouts turned to tree and yard work from pull-up work. So there was a little bit of a lag. But about 3 days after the hurricane kind of, the wind subsided anyway, I decided to say, well, can I do a pull-up or can't I do a pull-up? Drum roll, please. I can't do a pull-up. I can do about 3/4 of a pull-up. I can do a lot more of a pull-up than I could before I started the 22-day challenge. And I actually have seen progress in my strength, both from the pull-up standpoint, the hollow log hold, the hang hold, the inverted rows. So all of those are getting better, and I'm able to recruit more muscle. So I'm continuing to do it every night. To some degree, I'm going up and doing my inverted rows and, going through the same type of challenge. So I'll keep you posted, but I think I'm going to get it. I really do. It's kind of a nice segue into another topic, and that's protein. Where do you get your protein? Do you get enough protein on a plant-based diet? I thought that was kind of old news, but apparently it's not such old news to a lot of people. And there was an interview. I got asked a question about a recent interview of a PhD emeritus researcher named Don Lyman, who was on another podcast talking about protein. And there were multiple questions raised, such as we get older, do we need more protein? Can we absorb plant proteins adequately? Are we getting enough proteins? If you're a child and you're not getting animal proteins, will you develop right? And perhaps your muscles will never develop right, so you're going to be doomed to a life of small muscles and increased fat mass. And let's see what else. Well, obviously, if you lose muscle mass, we're all losing muscle mass as we age. And if you have a setback, you'll never get it back, and especially if you're eating plant-based. And, this gentleman has done, he spent his life in biomedical research. Unfortunately, his studies were never funded by NIH. They were only funded by industry. They were funded by Kraft. They were funded by the egg industry. They were funded by the Cattlemen's Association. So, and he currently has ties to protein powder companies. So he's done research, a lot of which on rats, some of which are on humans. A limited time. I think the longest might have been 16 months. Never treated a patient with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. His main interest was muscle building. So again, it was focused on individuals that want to bulk up and put on muscle. And he looks at specifically, amino acids, and his research, a lot of which was isolated on an amino acid called leucine, also looked at lysine and methionine. So we can look at a couple things that he had to say. And I have to say that listening to the podcast, it's a little scary. Because he looked at the recommended dietary allowance for protein and how it came about and how we measure it. And typically, an amino acid has nitrogen. And first of all, only plants can fix nitrogen. So if there weren't any plants, there wouldn't be any animals and there wouldn't be any humans. So we have to get our nitrogen from plants. The question is whether we use a middleman or not. And his argument was that the protein associated with plants is tied to fiber, and so it's not as bioavailable. And if you eat a ruminant, i.e. a cow or a deer, or a ruminant animal, then those animals are able to take that nitrogen and those proteins and convert it to a better protein that we can absorb, or a more absorbable protein, so we can get some of these essential amino acids. Now again, to go over things for you just a little bit, amino acids are the building block of proteins. Amino acids tie together to make peptides, tie together to make proteins. And that could be a protein like insulin. It could be a protein like skeletal muscle. It could be an enzyme, various things. But our body, collagen is a protein. There are 9 essential amino acids that we cannot make, we have to eat. Luckily, they're found in every food. They're found in the same percentages in animal muscle as they are in human muscle. That's what makes them like ours. And that's basically what he feels is the best protein to consume, is the protein that most resemble our skeletal muscle. What contradicts him early on is that we recycle a lot of our amino acids. Clearly, we can't take in the amount of protein that we recycle every day. So we recycle amino acids that we already have and turn them into other things. So we're constantly breaking things down and rebuilding using energy that we take in, but also energy from broken down parts. Our bodies are very resilient in doing that. That's probably one reason why you can go 40 days fasting with Dr. Alan Goldhammer and not die, because of lack of protein, and actually lose very little muscle mass when you're not exercising, because you're breaking down fat for energy. But, and he admits to this, that, we do recycle a lot of our amino acids. So we need these 9 essential amino acids, but again, they can come in. The question is, do they need to come in at a specific time of day? Is it better after a certain period in exercise? He doesn't feel that after you exercise, there's been a lot of physiology, or I guess training, that says, when you come in from a hard workout, you should replace your carbohydrate stores and your protein stores, and you got to do it within an hour, or you miss the window. He doesn't believe that occurs. He believes that we have a period of time that we can do that. But he does believe that overnight, because we're kind of breaking down things and we're not taking anything, we need a lot of protein first thing in the morning. So he thinks we should have a big protein meal first thing in the morning. Doesn't matter much about lunch, and then have another protein meal in the evening. Well, that's not really, and again, in a controlled environment, in an animal study, you might be able to show some differences in a short period of time over absorption. But for the most part, we just need to look at, who's done well over what period of time. And there's more to life than muscle recovery. We know in observational studies, Scandinavian countries that have a high dairy intake, associated with increased the dairy protein, casein, whey, associated with increased osteoporosis. We know from the China study, increased dairy associated with stimulation of cancer cell growth. So Dr. Campbell very eloquently took cancer cells, added casein protein, watched them increase, removed the casein protein, watched it decrease. Methionine, the very amino acid that he thinks is so important for muscle growth, and partially because it stimulates an enzyme called mTOR, target of rapamycin, that is associated with muscle growth. It's also associated with cancer cell growth. People with cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, have been shown to have increased mTOR levels. His reasoning is that the mTOR levels go up with high protein diets. After you eat, then they go down. And so you have this muscle growth, but you don't have mTOR elevations all the time. But then he cycled back in the talk, and he talked about, well, you don't have to worry about eating lunch because you have this elevation of mTOR after a big protein intake in the morning that lasts most of the day. So that was a little confusing to me. But I know that people with Alzheimer's, people that die at a younger age, have elevated levels of mTOR. So again, perhaps there's a trade-off with everything. There's always a side effect. I think, again, Dr. Campbell has eloquently described multiple times, there's no one isolated biochemical reaction that doesn't affect other biochemical reactions. Carnitine and choline is a great stimulator of muscle growth, but it also is a stimulator of trimethylamine oxide, TMAO, which is associated with increased inflammation and increased cardiovascular disease. Dr. Lehman wrote an editorial for the Egg Board saying that no, eggs are good for you, eggs help your eyesight, and there's lots of good things that eggs do, and we need carnitine and choline. So, again, it's a difference of opinion. And again, looking at specific things that, eggs can be very good. They are an extremely good source of vitamin A, but there are other things that don't have the toxic metabolic waste as eggs do. So I think you need to look at things whole as opposed to, again, isolated macronutrients. He feels that we should look at protein as we need so many grams of protein and that's it. The other things kind of fall into accordance depending on your energy needs. But the other thing that he agreed with early on was that total energy intake was probably the most important thing when you look at overall health state. So if you take too many calories in, there's going to be there's, again, too many calories, too much food, increased metabolic waste, and increased metabolic errors. So if we store too much fat, we block the uptake of glucose. We have high insulin levels. Everybody agrees high insulin is associated with insulin-like growth factor, increased blood vessel growth, which is called angiogenesis. So we don't want people to have high insulin levels, but it's not from taking carbohydrates that people have high insulin levels. It's because of the excess of calories that led to fat accumulation, blocking the uptake of glucose. So we've demonstrated, lots of people have demonstrated with plant-based nutrition, Dr. Goldhammer, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Esselstyn, are practitioners that when and any diet for that matter, that results in the loss of fat mass will improve metabolism, will improve the function of the mitochondria. If you get rid of the fat, then you can uptake glucose. You start to restore metabolic processes in the body. The question is, how do you maintain it? How do you maintain a lean body mass? How do you maintain adequate muscle mass over time? And what's associated with longevity? Dr. Lehman has good genes. His parents lived to be into their 90s. They were farmers. They raised cattle, soybean, and corn. They probably worked hard. He was a product of earlier years. People, again, less fast food. Today, people aren't, how are you getting your calories? I watched it through the hurricane. People went to the Wawa to get their calories, their Gatorade, their Doritos, their hot dogs, their hamburgers. The lineup for McDonald's giving away free food, Chick-fil-A, going to Bob Evans. Those are not places that you can order up. I want 40 grams of protein and low carbohydrate and low fat. We can't order up macronutrients. And even if you could order up macronutrients, what about the micronutrients associated with plants, fruits, and vegetables? What about the fiber associated with that protein? That he, again, agreed in his article for the Egg Board that the gut bacteria, having good gut microbiome, was associated with either the production or not the production of TMAO. So there's been studies that everybody agrees on that if you give a vegetarian or a vegan has different microbiome than a meat eater. And so if you give a plant eating person an animal product, they won't generate TMAO as opposed to a meat eater, mainly because of their difference in their gut microbiome. There have been lots of animal studies looking at what you feed determines what kind of gut microbiome you have. If you eat a high fiber diet, you have a certain gut microbiome. If you eat a high animal protein diet, you have a certain gut microbiome. And the one associated with animals increase the production of TMAO. So, therefore, it goes to an increased inflammatory state. I wanted to take a couple foods just to kind of maybe go over and maybe I could drive the point home. So probably the most the most lean protein source that a paleo high protein diet person might eat is probably a chicken breast. So if you ate 4.2 ounces, which is, again, the deck of cards size of a chicken breast without the skin, it's 198 calories. 39 of those calories come from fat, which makes 20% fat. Saturated fat was 4.3. If you want to take the 4.3 times 9, it's about 38 calories from saturated fat. There's 102 milligrams of cholesterol. There's 37 grams of protein. So the chicken breast is 75% protein. So it's be a high protein item in a relatively low fat protein. Or a low fat item. Plant-based diet, we're looking at 10 to 15% fat. So certainly a chicken breast is great as far as the fat content from a paleo. Not so great if you're looking from a vegan or a plant-based standpoint. Let's look at the incredible egg. 72 calories, pretty low in calories, 4.8 grams of fat. 43 of the calories in an egg come from fat. So it's 60% fat and 35% protein. So clearly it's not a high protein food. There's also 4.9% of the RDA for iron. In a previous podcast, I've looked and talked about iron and animal sources of iron that's readily absorbable, that we absorb excess iron every day if we're eating animal products, and we have no way to eliminate it, which is toxic. So there's a metabolic waste associated with eating even a small egg when it comes down to not only the protein content, but the iron content, the cholesterol content, for starters. Bacon, that seems to be a favorite paleo protein. 35 grams serving, that's 3 slices of bacon. It's 161 calories. That's if it's probably not fried, anything that's other than the bacon. 109 of the 161 calories come from fat. That's 68% fat. There's 12 grams of protein, so it's 30% protein. So it's not really a high protein food. Again, it's a high fat food. And with bacon, you get 581 milligrams of sodium as an issue. So if your daily requirement for sodium is 1,500 milligrams, 800 milligrams we hope is going to come from fruits and vegetables, and you add that 500 milligrams from your 3 slices of bacon, you pretty much got your salt intake for the day. And what nutrition analysis would be without some peanut butter? Because everybody likes peanut butter, and everybody thinks when they give up animal products that they're going to need peanut butter to get their protein source in. But 2 tablespoons of peanut butter has 188 calories, 76% of which are fat. There's also 152 milligrams of sodium, 3.8% of the RDA for iron, which is not that far off of an egg, and 7 grams of protein. So clearly, that would be 15% protein. So clearly peanut butter is not a high protein food either. It's a high fat food. How about salmon? We're all supposed to eat more fish. Salmon, 8 ounces, so you get a bigger serving for some reason, at least when I looked at my nutrition facts. So an 8-ounce serving is 468 calories. I guess you could eat half of that. 252, it's 54% fat. And 50 grams of protein in 8 ounces of salmon, that's 11% protein. So again, these things aren't really high protein. They're high fat that happens to have protein. So you don't get an isolated increase in protein. So if we were going to go back and say we're going to have 40 grams of protein for breakfast, and we're going to eat that in the form of food and not perhaps the supplements that he is involved with, the company that allows you to customize your shakes. But if we were going to just do the protein, we would have to get a pretty good caloric intake to get all the protein that we really were after. And with that protein comes fat at 9 calories per gram. Now we're going to get a lot of excess calories, which is going to take us down the road of diabetes, excess body weight, and all the inflammation and increased cancer risk that goes with it. And we haven't even mentioned what we all agree that's a need is fiber to get those good gut microbes. None of these foods have significance. There's a little bit of fiber, I guess, in peanut butter, but it's certainly going to be hard if you're going to get that high of a protein consumption per day to get 50 grams of fiber or more. So when we look at societies that's lived a long time, they typically have a very, very high fiber. So African nations that have a high fiber diet don't have any colorectal issues, no appendicitis, no gallbladder disease. If we look at Asians, especially in the China study before the American influence, high tofu, soybean as a protein, vegetables, rice. So it's a pretty low protein diet, longevity, much less breast cancer, prostate cancer than we American counterparts. So look at the blue zones, high carbohydrate diet in the form of sweet potatoes, rice, corn, fruits, again, in the lower side of protein. So you might take a RAD, or you might take a group of college students and look at their absorption of protein. But if you look over the lifespan of a human and what actually leads to longevity, I would look more towards the blue zones or some of these long-lasting populations. You can also look at what works. Dr. Goldhammer, the Esselstyns, Rip Esselstyn, the Happy Pear Group, James Wilkes. There's certainly a whole host. Carl Lewis, gold medal Olympian. A variety of athletes that are plant-based that seem to not be dying of protein deficiency. The other thing that they talk about too, is that as you get older, when you're young, you're very anabolic. We're growing as young people, developing, growing in height, growing in size, maturing. Our endocrine organs are maturing. So there's a lot of hormones that are driving our ability to maintain and grow muscle mass. After we're an adult, we're not growing anymore, so the hormone insulin, goes down, even in men, certainly in women after menopause. So to maintain muscle mass, you have to have exercise. You have to have weight-bearing exercise. And again, to be mobile, to be able to move, it's not all about put you in a chair and feed you, and we can create this perfect human if we just give you the right amount of macronutrients. We're much more complicated. But at the same time, saying that we're much more complicated, we're also much simpler, that we have evolved to be able to withstand famines, to withstand excesses, to withstand a bad diet now and then. There's surviving and there's thriving, but we know as a population, for the most part, survival until childbearing ages, regardless of what you eat, is there. How you age depends on, what's happened. We know that women in particular, if you haven't developed a lot of muscle mass and then you start to lose it, that's when people start to develop increased fat mass as the years go on, because muscle mass is being lost. Exercise patterns decrease. It's important to be mobile, exercise, be strong, develop good muscles, and be well-rounded, not being round, but being well-rounded as far as exercise and nutrition from the get-go, to have a healthy human as we age. But the attention has to be paid to what we're eating, but nature provides it. Whole fruits, vegetables, eating foods in their whole, original form, as opposed to isolated protein powders and protein bars and branched-chain amino acid supplements. I don't believe that our bodies were designed, they haven't been around that long, maybe even if you put them back into the 80s, it's not a very long time for these isolates to be around. So what does our body have to do? We can survive on some of those things, and certainly they can be a supplement, but I don't think that as a human population, we're best served with taking in macronutrients in the form of powders and waters and supplemental vitamins. I don't think we've come to be quite that mechanistic. And the last thing I'll say, it's not very fun. I like to look at my plate and see color. I like to smell different herbs and spices. I like to enjoy what I'm eating. I like to grow a lot of what I'm eating. I like to think that what I'm growing is adding to the environment, not taking away from the environment. So if you look at factory farmed animals, and again, if we look at our nutrient content, even of, heavily fertilized, pesticide, genetically modified vegetables, they're not the nutrients that an organic vegetable would give us. If that comes from soil that's replete, we're not getting the nutrients that we'd like to get, perhaps. If you take that one step further and look at factory farms with animals, shoved full of arsenic and synthetic vitamins and hormones, I'm not sure that protein source is really what we're after. I'm also comfortable in looking at what works over time. My friend Harvey Lewis is a fabulous ultra runner at 48, running hundreds of miles in 2 or 3 day time period, setting a record 365 miles, right, in Big's Backyard Ultra, and recovering and running in a day. If he were so protein deficient on a plant-based diet, I do believe he would be dead with the number of miles that he covers, and he's thriving. His friend Mike Freeman, 100-year-old guy, colon cancer, when plant-based, he's still running at 100. I mean, it goes on and on. You can say that those are isolated individuals, but I don't believe that they're isolated individuals, especially when you look at, again, the blue zones and other people that are thriving on a plant-based diet. I've said before, I have a terrible family history. When you look at genetics, the women on my dad's side of the family were all overweight, glucose intolerant, built like pears. I am not. I am in better shape now than I was when I was probably 40. My times continue to get faster when I'm running. I feel like I'm getting stronger. I'm going to get that pull up. So I don't believe that I'm losing muscle mass on this plant-based diet that I've been doing since the late 90s, early 2000s. So, there you have it. There are lots of different philosophies. You have to choose what's good for you, what you think is something you can deal with. That gets to be your health journey. But I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete, and I'm quite comfortable being plant-based and feel like it's working for me and my patients. I've seen chest pain, angina go away. I've seen claudication improve. I've taken people off their diabetic medications. I've seen people thrive after cancer. I've seen people normalize their body mass index. I've seen people that are more healthy at 82, 83 than they were at 70, all because of changing to a plant-based diet. So I'm quite comfortable in the practice of plant-based medicine as far as people thriving. I am not sponsored by any industry. You'll see there's no sponsors on this podcast. I'll talk to you about products that I like, but they don't give me any money. I don't derive my money from them. I would not have my patients do something that I wouldn't do, and if I felt that there was a better way, then I'd certainly go down that path. And I did listen very intently to the podcast, and I do believe that he believes in his research. He's biased that way. He was raised that way. He's got a lot riding on it, and I hope he lives to be 102, just like his parents did. But I'm happy being a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete in Southwest Florida. And I thank you very much for listening. And I'll keep you updated on my pull-ups. Next race is in November, swim run. I got to get in the pool. I'm hoping the pool opens up back up next week so I can get my pool work done. Then we're going to the CIM marathon in California, followed by an ultra in the spring. So this 60-year-old is not losing muscle mass, and I keep hope to get those times better and continue to enjoy life and running well into my hundreds. So thanks for listening.